There we go. All right, so we will get started with the regular discussion. So this is in reference to our reading on sexual harassment and also the Lone Star case.
Right.
So the first question is, how would you evaluate Jack DaCosta's options at this point?
I'm just glad I'm not him.
I know, right? Well, I think his options are he can pretend he never heard it, which, well, I mean, he didn't, or he can report it. I don't know what else there is to do, or I guess talk to Julia and help her figure out.
Yeah, help her figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's what I would probably end up doing. Was trying to talk to Julia.
Yeah.
But as a manager, is he obligated to report it to someone?
I think he's obligated to discuss it with her for sure, and then obviously there's certain situations where, for example, in our doohickeys, it was mentioning how the girl was complaining that the guys were objectifying her and talking about her body and things like that, and she was obviously offended by it. And then there's other times when employees are kind of like, oh, I think it's kind of flattering. Like, I don't really care. It doesn't bother me. But either way, I think you have to address it with the person who...
Yeah, that's one of those things I read on Notes of Law of Sexual Harassment. It says something about federal law about whether or not they could bring into account how a person's dressed.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't think... So with the law, like you were saying, it's kind of... blurry, just because, for example, if your employment requires you dress a certain way professionally, then
yeah, but I've seen
you're going out
where my husband works. You see some of them dressed, they are dressed professionally, but they're still dressed provocatively, like church, especially for us.
That's what I was getting at.
Right?
Is that there's still people who go outside of the dress standard, so it's like, I don't think it, like you were saying, so it's like, does that come into play? I don't think it does so much with like...
I would think the federal government said it didn't.
Yeah. So.
Which I was surprised to see.
Yeah, I can see it going both ways, because for some aspects, like you were saying, even if there is a dress code, people can dress how they want within those bounds. So it's like they can still dress provocatively, even though they're, like you said, dressing professionally, or, you know, business casual, and they take it a little too far casual, and so it can
the bar afterwards and stuff.
It can go either way. Exactly, it could go either way. So it's kind of hard to determine, you know, what is, you know, how strict you need to be on like guidelines and stuff. But I've had certain situations where bosses have gone up to employees and said, like, you know, I don't mean to call you out, but, you know, they pull them aside and they say, just so you know, like, you're probably shouldn't be dressing like that. Yeah,
it's making other people feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, so,
or it's making me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, especially if it becomes an issue where it's a distraction, or it's
put it nicely, you're becoming a safety hazard.
Yeah. It's almost, you're like, yeah, it's kind of a compliment, kind of, you know, you just need to get it figured out. It's a safety hazard, and
or something. Yeah,
take it how you want it, but you can't be dressing like that.
But I've been in Julia's situation too.
Yeah.
And, you know, she's skeptical. She's right. Like she's telling her sister, it's a he said, she said.
Exactly. So that's the hard part. And like we talked about last week, it's you kind of got to get everybody's story and put the pieces together to figure out what's the truth, because, you know, even the best people, they might tell the story with just a different perspective, and that kind of changes the story a bit, even if they're telling the truth. And they're telling it exactly how they feel it happened. It's all based on, you know, relativity and how that person believed it happened. So it's not necessarily like one person's lying, the other person isn't. It's just from their point of view, the story changes.
What we've heard in this story, I have to say this guy's pretty much a creep for boss.
I was just going to say that. It just kind of seems like, I don't know. There's a lot of opportunities where he could have stepped.
I wonder though if there's any other females he's done this to. If you could, you know, so that they could go together as a group, it might, where it would add credibility to all of their stories. You know,
or like she was worried about her husband and taking matters into his own hands.
Yeah.
If I was the husband, I would do the same thing. I'm like, okay, well,
You haven't read the conclusion, have you?
Is there a conclusion? I didn't see that.
Yes, I won't spoil it. It's supposed to be in Skylar's directions.
Okay. Well, I'm interested to see now.
But for the credibility of our discussion, I will not mention it.
Yeah. So the next question's similar. It's what do you think he should do or should have done?
I don't know if he should have called the law office. That maybe he should have looked on, because most companies online now have an EEOC policy or sexual harassment policy online. You know what I mean? Maybe he should have done that before he called the legal office.
Yeah.
I think either way, I feel like he has kind of a responsibility to report that because I liked how they explained it in the case. Later on, if she does pursue action against the company, it'll look like they condone it. And plus,
and the notes
for a victim to come forward, but it does need to get out there. Like it's not okay for that to happen. I don't know.
Yeah. Do you think it would have done him any good to talk to the guy since he's friends with him, sort of?
Yeah.
Like tell him to back off before it becomes a problem? Or depends on his personality too, though.
Yeah.
Some guys would take that as a challenge and make it worse.
Yeah.
I don't know. I
know they would take it as a challenge and it would make it worse.
Yeah.
Like it's none of your business and stay out of my business. She works for me.
I feel like he went far enough that talking to him probably wouldn't help just because it's clearly harassment. That guy has to know that's wrong. If he's sticking his hand down his shirt, it's like, you know what you're doing.
Yep.
You know that's wrong. That's black and white there.
Yeah.
I would just take it to someone higher. That's my opinion.
So from the reading the note on sexual harassment, do you think DaCosta got accurate advice when he called the counsel's office?
That's kind of rough to say. I'd say yes. I don't think they gave him enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And what do you think?
Kind of like the lawyer threatened him.
Yeah. So if you didn't think,
and you've mentioned it to me, you have to do something, and got really, you know what I mean, in his face, kind of.
Yeah. And what advice do you think they should have given him on top of what they already told him? So they told him, if you want, you can report this to EEO. They'll do an investigation. So apart from that, what do you think else they should have said to him?
Well, I think they need to report to the HR in the company as well, because I'm sure the company has a reporting system too.
Yeah, you think they would have directed him to the policy on how to report it. You know what I mean? Just instead of just saying go to EEO. That these are, because you would think there would have to be, like from our other cases that we've read and stuff, that there'd have to be some documentation or something. So because I've been in situations where it wasn't this type of sexual harassment, it's just kind of harassment. And I was told by my supervisor, you need to start keeping a log. It sounds terrible, but sometimes you do. You have to start keeping a log of the date and time and what happened with some people, sometimes when there's a bad situation going on.
Yeah.
And whether it's harassment or just, someone just being mean.
Yeah. Yeah. So the whole situation with them, and as far as like the ending, it just seemed kind of weird that it's so hard in certain situations because other people, who are not Julia, if this were to happen to them, they're kind of like, well, I don't care the consequences. I don't care the ramifications. Like, this is getting reported. This person should not be working around people.
But he wouldn't have took advantage of that type of person.
Right. And so in that situation.
And he knows she needs her job.
Exactly.
And that's usually where the quid pro quo comes in. They usually know they have that power over a person. They've evaluated the situation, if it makes any sense.
Yeah.
So.
Does she say that in the case? Does she say she's worried about losing her job if she reports it? I was trying to look and see if I could see that in there.
I thought she mentioned it when he's overhearing the conversation.
Yeah.
about his sister. You know, when she's because the tech. I mean, I'm drawing a conclusion, but she says the only person who knows is her sister. So you guess that that's who she's probably talking to and crying to.
Yeah.
For those of us, that's what we would do. We call and cry to our sisters, or at least our best friend, right?
So it's just unfortunate that she's basically she's trying to get transferred, so the problem can just go away. But for other people, it's not going to go away. It's just going to be the same.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. You have to realize sometimes it's a hard thing to do, but are you shoving it off on somebody else?
Yeah.
And the tendency is to blame yourself.
Yeah.
A lot of times.
Unfortunate. So the last one is. So would you guys characterize what happened to Julia as quid pro quo harassment or hostile environment, and why?
To me, it's a little of both.
Yeah.
Because he's making it hostile for her. I don't know if it's actually come down to he said he'd fire her, but
yeah,
you know what I mean.
I mean, she's a little bit afraid of losing her job, so yeah, I would say a little bit quid pro quo, but I think it's more of the hostile work environment.
But the law says too, though, that quid pro quo is usually one-on-one. Somebody in authority over someone.
Yep.
Hostile often and usually is more a group. You know, posting inappropriate pictures, sending out bad jokes, or telling bad, wrong kind of jokes all the time. And making it just, I mean, it can be individual. But it's not usually as much.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know if it's as much hostile environment like you were saying, just because it's between her and this guy, and then her manager is basically trying to figure out what to do about it. And so,
he's her, and this guy's her direct boss,
right? And so, yeah, so it's just kind of a awkward situation where it's like she doesn't want to report it, so there's not a lot they can do about it. I mean, they can sit down with the guy who's doing it, but at the same time, it's like,
and warn him and say he's going to be being watched. But like she said, he always does it where no one sees anything anyway.
Also, I mean, it wasn't sexual harassment, but for example, with the
I don't know, putting the hand down the shirt pretty much is sexual harassment.
No, I'm saying I'm talking about a different the one about what's his name, the Muslim, and he reported it, but he wanted to stay anonymous. So that one wasn't sexual harassment, but it was racial harassment and discrimination. And so
but the case said that it wasn't.
Right, because he kept that anonymous and he never actually went to the boss to get it resolved. So that's why it didn't work in his favor.
He didn't get you.
So he lost. They said that he could go to trial, but like he probably didn't have enough evidence. That's what it said.
Yeah.
And so for this situation, it's like this can come back and bite you in the butt if you don't, not that you need to go public with it, but you at least need to involve the person who is obviously doing the harassment. Otherwise, if this later on were to go to court, that you would have no evidence because you talked about it, but you kept it anonymous. So it doesn't seem like, even if it was a big deal, you're making it seem like it's not a big deal because you're like, oh, I'll just get transferred. So even if it is a big deal and you're really affected by it, if it went to court, it doesn't appear that way because you decided to stay anonymous and you just decided to get transferred instead. And you just thought that would be easier. So unfortunately, if that were to come back, not saying it would for sure, but
would Julia be held liable if she did get transferred and then he does this to the next secretary?
Probably not, but
what I mean? She didn't bring this forward.
It would just be, like I said, it just wouldn't convict him. And so that's kind of the hard part is unfortunately, she could use this as evidence to help other people, but
I'd have the guilty conscience for leaving and the next person having to put up with it.
Yeah. So but I don't think legally you can hold one victim liable for
the actions
of the other.
Because they were saying that the company as a whole knows. Like if she goes to EEO and they say, well, you don't really have a case, we'll just work on getting you transferred. Then it's back on the company, right?
Right.
So
it's those fine lines that decide which way it goes.
Yeah.
And so if they don't take the proper steps to make it, make other people aware and make the proper authorities aware, then there's nothing that they can do about it. And essentially they aren't held responsible.
Yeah.
And so if she doesn't report it and something were to happen, it's like, well, we talked about it. She didn't want to report it. She didn't want to file an official claim. So there's nothing we could have done further to help her because she, exercised her rights to not deal with it. So it's kind of unfortunate.
At least though, then there would be a written record if you did it again.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes, unfortunately, it does take a paper trail to get rid of someone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, those are the questions that.
Yeah. Did you see your other discussion leaders' questions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
So that one's talking about policy. It's basically saying, so if someone gets harassed, how would they report it?
I think you should go to well, in this case, you can't go to your direct supervisor.
I guess go to his boss.
Yeah, I have to go to his boss and say I have a problem.
Yeah.
Or
so
or like I'd go to HR maybe and ask for advice.
So even apart from this, so just in any given situation, so if you guys were working and this, this happens to you, what would you do if somebody gets harassed? How do they report it? So not necessarily just for Julia, but in general.
I think I would go to HR.
Yeah, I think I'd be more comfortable with HR than another boss.
Yeah.
Just a little bit more discreet.
Yeah.
And that's kind of their specialty. HR or EEO, because I'm sure they would tell you if you needed to go to the EEO office.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine the company has one, right? Or someone that handles these things.
Yep. And plus, you don't have that pressure of your direct authority over you or your manager, so you don't feel like in Julia, in this case, like you guys said, she's worried about her job. So in HR, you can just sit down, you can discuss it with them. It can stay anonymous or you can bring it to light. It's up to you, and they can work it out.
If she'd gone and asked to be anonymous, if they could have just, if the HR department could call other women that work with this gentleman in and find out if there's going on with anyone else anonymously, you know what I mean? And they might find a trend that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I guess they could do that. I'm trying to think of, ways to do it so that it doesn't become because let's say all these things are false, then you have to worry about that. So if this is a false accusation and then you bring in the women and then word gets around that this guy is possibly sexually harassing somebody and it's not true, then you're ruining somebody's reputation and you're so it'd be hard, I think, to do that.
It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah. So I agree with you that I think that something like that should happen, but it could go either way. So
I told y'all about the guy one time that was making rude comments about another female who just got on the little remote I was on.
Mm-hmm.
And what was interesting was that I reported it to the first sergeant. They reported it to the commander, and she had already felt uncomfortable with him because he'd done inappropriate pictures in his office of his wife. That made her feel uncomfortable as a female commander. But she said, but it's a remote. She's giving him some leeway. But she'd heard he'd been talking behind her back and she hadn't heard about it. So they started confronting him about this one thing that I brought up and then found out he had a drinking problem and all kinds of other issues. So, sometimes one thing leads to another.
Yep.
Yeah. So another question, how will confidentiality be protected in an investigation? So once EEO is called and they start an investigation, how can confidentiality be protected at that point?
Depends on the size of the company, for one thing.
Yeah. So in this case, let's say you're Julia and she did decide to go forward with it, but she wanted to stay anonymous. How would you be able to do that?
I mean, I think like you guys were saying, maybe individually or bring in other people that work with him or just talk to the
males and females and just ask them in general about his performance or something. It doesn't have to be specifically about how does he treat you or, we've had a complaint. You don't have to say that. You can just, you know what I mean? Just in general, keep an eye out, ask how do an evaluation on the department as a whole, maybe.
Yeah. Or I guess maybe you could do another train. I mean, if it's not like a super serious, like you could do another training for the whole company. I mean,
Yes.
that's pretty vague and it's not specific or targeted.
Didn't we read about an example of that somewhere in the reading this week? About they had a problem with somebody, so they did training for everyone. But I think it was just like inappropriate emails or inappropriate jokes or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, something like that.
So they decided they should train everybody again. Because in that case, you know, because you want to get at the heart of the person who's making the inappropriate jokes or comments, and you want the ones who are condoning it, let them know they're doing something wrong too.
Yeah. And like, I think that's a great idea, because think about if you were the culprit and you were to blame, and then you're sitting in a meeting and all of a sudden they're like, we're going to talk about sexual harassment and what is not okay. And then they use like specific examples of things that you have done. Then you're kind of like, whoa, well, somebody knows about it. So,
and they start mentioning the legal ramifications.
Exactly. So I think that's a great idea, in that if the person wants to stay anonymous this way, it's not like, well, she had to have been the one who reported it because, you know, I know that I did that. So it's kind of like, you know, it keeps them protected, but it also drives the point home of, you know, this is not okay. And this is what will happen if you are, you know, caught, you know, with doing sexual harassment or being involved in other discrimination in the workplace. I mean, yeah. So I think that's a great idea. I think that's great.
Like we said, but it depends on how severe it is too, though.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, you're right. Because if it's something that's like, you know, some guy is flirting with a girl at work and he's just, you know, it's supposed to be harmless.
And you're an observer, you can tell it makes her uncomfortable.
Exactly. And then she's just kind of like, well, I don't like that. You know, I'm dating somebody. I don't.
Yeah.
And so then it becomes harassment because, you know.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that you can take up charges against customers.
Oh, interesting.
Huh? I'm like, really? I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah. I mean,
I figured you just talk to your boss and tell your boss, you got to talk to this customer. They're becoming a problem, right?
Yeah. So we talked about, you know, inquiring people individually to keep them, you know, keep it anonymous. Doing trainings that point out things that are not okay and ramifications for people who break those laws and break those rules. Anything else you guys can think of to protect confidentiality?
It was a different kind of harassment case, but there were only 100 people in our unit, and they had us fill out questionnaires, but then they made you put your race, your sex, and for us they made us put our rank.
Well,
you know, and when
it narrows it down,
pretty much narrows some people down to you're one. You know, there's only like one female senior airman.
Yeah,
that's white, right? You know, like, so I think sometimes you can ask for too much information when you're trying to keep something confidential. When you're trying to describe it in generic terms, but they're not that generic if you're not careful.
Yeah. I don't know. It seems really like it'd be really hard. And like if you really had to investigate a case, I don't know. It'd be hard to keep it confidential. It seems like.
Yeah.
I agree.
But, I mean, you don't have to broadcast it to the company, but still, like, if it's very specific.
Sometimes it's better for the company to come out front and say what's happening than all the rumors and innuendos to go around, because those get blown out of proportion sometimes.
Or at least to help people keep an eye out for it. So it's like, well, now that people know, they're going to be looking around and saying, oh, that's harassment.
Really a simple little story could have turned into a rape case by the time it goes through the rumor mill.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know what I mean? A severe, you know.
He said, she said type thing. So
yeah, sometimes it gets out of hand too.
Yeah. So, what rights do victims and accused harassers have? So we've talked a lot about, you know, the victims, and you know, we've talked a little bit about Julia and what her, you know, rights are as a person being harassed. So let's look at both sides of it and what rights do victims and accused harassers have, because obviously
Yeah.
Like I said, it could be just an accusation. It could not even be true at all.
Yeah,
And
which
so,
does happen too.
what rights do they have?
They have
on
a right
both sides of it?
to be heard and to give their side of the story. You know, can you imagine if actions were taken against somebody without, you know, they do an investigate and they don't ask the
exactly
accused what happened? Which is kind of what that lawyer, it felt like when that lawyer was talking to DeCosto, is he's kind of like going, well, you have to do something. This is horrible and you have to do, you know, without even wanting to hear both sides. She's only heard, she's heard, what she's heard is hearsay.
I like that hearsay specifically.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Huh? I like that because, I mean, like you said, I mean, hearsay is a huge issue, especially.
Boss, but for all we know, she could have been talking about somebody she was dating or something. You know, when you're hearing only half of a conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was something I was wondering about. She didn't mention that specific boss. What was his name? It was just boss. I'm like, it could have been a higher up boss. It could have been her direct supervisor. We didn't know for sure who it was.
Right. That's why you wonder if DeCosto, he said he's hung out with this guy a couple times personally, if he just gets that feeling that it was him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see him doing that, unfortunately.
Yeah. It also has to go along the premise that people are innocent until proven guilty. It can't go the other way around. Otherwise, it's not a very good investigation.
Right.
If you just, okay, she said that he's the one who did it. Okay, let's arrest him, and he's going to be, you know, paying fines and, you know, legal fees and all these things. So you gotta,
yeah.
You guys said it's nice to have the right to hear both sides of the story before, you know.
I wondered if in these EEO cases, if they, you know, assign some kind of counsel to consult with both sides.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it would be separated or if it would be the same person talking to both sides or how they would do it to make it fair. But yeah.
Yeah. See, I haven't ever worked other than really in the military, so I just know how they would do it.
Yeah.
So that makes it a little rough.
Yeah.
We have the staff judge advocate that comes in and does that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So.
So what kinds of things? So if you guys, because my assignment this week is to create a sexual harassment policy. So what are some things that you guys would include in a sexual harassment policy? Let's say you're coming up with a memo, some sort of small policy that you wanted to distribute around the office. What kinds of things would you want to include in there as just kind of an upfront, here's, you know, just the guidelines, you know, something simple before you did like an extensive training? What would you
just said, guidelines. I think there should be at least an office that you need to, and a phone number maybe that you can contact.
And specifically what the different types of harassment are, like spell it out in the policy, like what constitutes harassment, how you report the harassment.
I remember when they first started doing sexual harassment in the military, they didn't start until the mid 80s, roughly, right? The beginning. And we used to say, they used to ask us as women if it had gotten better when they started having briefings and training on it. Yeah. And we looked at it and we go, actually, it's gotten worse. And they go, what do you mean it got worse? And we go, you gave them guidelines and you told them where harassment starts and ends. So they push right up to the line. Before that, they didn't know where the line was, so they didn't bother approaching it. It sounds terrible, but it's kind of true.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah. But a lot's changed. 30 years? 40 years?
Yeah.
Almost.
So who to talk to and report it? Maybe a hotline number that people can call if they see it or experience harassment.
Yeah, I think a hotline would be really good.
Because they do have those. They have confidential, or you can, you know, make it public. So it just depends on how you want to go about it. But
I think that depends on the company how they handle it.
Because in this case, like for example, the doohickeys, like we just got called in and we're like the first HR representative they have. So it's kind of a company that you're coming into, and it's a little.
It's a small family company, and that makes it hard.
Yeah. So then there are other companies that have humongous HR departments that, you know, might be looking more out for
this company that has its own legal department too.
Yeah. So it's a bigger situation than maybe just a few people, 100 people or whatever. But
right.
What else would you get? Training, you guys were talking about, maybe, putting
Yeah,
together
and
trainings.
more than read the stuff on, you know how a lot of times the training is just read it online and then take a quiz?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we all know that's not really that effective.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Maybe
some most effective I've seen is where you had to go and watch a video.
PowerPoint presentation of some kind where
Well,
they're
we actually had a video and they showed different forms of sexual harassments happening. Because when they first did the first one with a guy on a guy, or a woman harassing a guy, a guy under her, people were laughing about, like, who would ever report that? No guy's going to report a pretty girl hitting on him. And we were like, no, but harassment's harassment.
Yeah, no matter what.
If you're married and you're not interested, that's harassment.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if she's pretty.
Yeah. Awesome. So trainings, maybe follow up to make sure like you said, they asked if things had changed after the trainings.
Right.
I think that's good to know on both sides, is just figure out, okay, is this even helping? Questionnaires or surveys asking, okay, is this beneficial? Do you feel like there's less? Do you think that it stayed the same? Do you think there's more? So I like that.
Yeah. That's like with the part of the hotline. Maybe it doesn't even have to be harassment, or if you've seen harassment, can you think of something to improve the overall culture of our company when it comes to harassment?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Also explaining, like you said, explaining ramifications, legal action that can be taken.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's a good one.
Against offenders, I guess.
Especially with everything that's been going on in the news lately. Can you imagine the people who work for these producers and stuff, that pretty much their companies are basically crumbling because of what they've done?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that another way that it's a hostile work environment? You don't report your boss because if your boss goes down, it takes the whole company down.
Yeah. That's tough.
That gets tough,
Yeah. Yeah, that can be interesting. Yeah, I'm trying to think of what else. So consequences, trainings, follow-ups, hotline numbers, who to report it to, who to talk to, guidelines for sexual harassment, what it actually is and what is considered harassment, different types of sexual harassment, like we talked about, a man harassing a woman harassing a man, woman harassing a woman, man harassing a man. So there's tons of different versions of it. So
and you can harass a group of people.
Yeah.
You can be the boss that tells the bad jokes that bother the men and the women in your division.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So
that makes everybody feel uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of anything else maybe to include in this. I mean, it's pretty much just a policy, so it doesn't have to be enormous, I don't think, but
and it's like, a lot of the things I read about how to write any kind of policy, you need to make sure you're, like we were saying, make an annual review.
Mm-hmm.
Are you updating it? Is it working? Is it not working for you?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. I mean, it says the paper is going to be about a page or more, single spaced. So
I think my diversity was about 3 or 4 pages.
Yeah, which is good. So I think it'll probably be about that length, but it also doesn't have to be, a 30-page.
No.
Safety manual on how to,
That would be for the big corporations that have all all the legal lawyers that write it.
Yeah, but I just want to make sure that I put, sufficient stuff in there. Yeah. So if you guys think of anything else, let me know, but I'll probably start writing this up. But yeah, that's pretty much it. It's important to know in this day and age that, like you said, it can happen to anybody. There's nobody who's exempt from these situations. There's nobody who's exempt from harassment. It's not, people made jokes.
So, Christy, you can report your husband if you need to.
People made jokes that, like, oh yeah, like a man's never going to report a woman.
I tease my husband sometimes about his boss, and I'm going to report him.
So, but yep, I think it's good to know these things. It's good to understand
how the case turned out.
Oh yeah. Oh, no.
You want me to read it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When Jack called corporate counsel, he forgot about caller ID. The lawyer used the information he gave her to figure out the people he was talking about. She contacted Lone Star EEO, which launched a formal investigation. The EEO tried hard to get Martinez to cooperate. French denied all charges, claiming that Martinez had made up her story to protect herself from pending layoffs. DeCoste was asked for evidence, but he didn't have any. Julia's husband found out what was going on, beat her up, and forced her to quit.
Wait,
French,
her husband beat her up?
yeah.
Oh.
That's why she didn't want to go for. One of the reasons she didn't go forward. She knew her husband's temper.
Well, I thought he was going to go after the bomb.
But she figured he's one of those people that was figuring she was doing something to ask for it, so it's her fault.
Wow.
You know, so you just don't know. Sometimes you make things worse, right? French, of course, survived the investigation with only a bruised reputation. He blamed everything on DeCoste for calling corporate counsel. There was so much animosity between DeCoste and French that DeCoste left the company after 3 months.
Wow.
And it says, then asked the group what Lone Star's sexual harassment policy, if Lone Star had one, did Jack know anything about it? What policy, procedure, or training might have improved the situation Jack found himself in? And would the policy you create as a group have been helpful to Jack? Could clear policies and procedures have helped avoid any of the final consequences in this case? Because it came about the wrong way, I think, because legal jumped the gun, sort of. You know what I mean?
Maybe some sort of like anonymous email would have been better. Like
emails can be traced too. That's why we said there needs to be an anonymous hotline, or there should have been clear policies, and they should have been posted around the workplace.
Yeah, because that's unfair to Jack DeCoste that he got pulled into everything like that. I don't know. Yeah, I think anonymous reporting needs to be a thing. Maybe make that clear how you can report that anonymously. Have it posted somewhere.
Yeah, because like they have like workers hotline where like if you think you're being treated unfairly,
I don't think
or whatever,
anyone has seen the consequences of Martinez's husband.
Yeah,
so the company would have been more worried about her husband showing up and trying to kill French at work. That would have been their concern, probably. You know, they forget to worry about, unless she tried to explain to them, and I'm guessing she probably didn't, how her husband would react.
Yeah.
Would they have dropped it if she told them?
Yeah, it's so unfortunate.
Which leads to a whole other group of problems that don't get covered in this class.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm dying.
Oh no, your phone's dying?
Yeah, and I'm on the video call there.
So, yeah, well, we pretty much wrapped it up. We can stop there if you want.
You guys would like to know how it ended.
Yeah, thanks.